Missed you. The Prime Minister rolls out the green and gold carpet, Aussie visitors first, visa waiver countries next, and everyone else maybe sooner than expected. But the tourism industry says it'll be 4 years before the numbers hit pre-COVID levels, and they need more financial support. And with airline routes slashed, is New Zealand relegated to the aviation equivalent of the milk run? We'll talk to the tourism and airline industries. Lights out on the Coromandel, with some businesses forced to stay home, all because of a chunk of wayward plastic. Seriously? And the old school locomotive shunted out of service in favour of a greener option. Catch us on Sky Channel 83.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. Ahi Marie ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The decimated tourism industry has been thrown a lifeline it's been pleading for. The country's border will be opened 2 months earlier than expected to vaccinated Australians from April 13th and to fully vaccinated tourists from visa waiver countries just over 2 weeks later. It means Australians can come here during their school holidays and for Easter, Anzac Day and the ski season. Auckland's Economic Development Agency says welcoming back overseas tourists will be a turning point for the city's struggling businesses. Auckland Unlimited Director of Investment and Industry, Pam Ford, says knowing that tourists will return in the coming months provides certainty.
The last 2 months have been probably the toughest of the whole 2 years. And so for those hanging on, this is just the exact news that they needed. There were many that were on the brink, on the knife edge. And so I'm hoping that this will enable them to hold on now.
Pam Ford expects shuttered cafes and businesses to reopen when visitors return. People with COVID-19 are staying in hospital for longer, and the average age of patients is increasing as the outbreak continues. The data comes from Auckland and Northland hospitals, which have 2/3 of the 971 cases. Today, the Ministry of Health reported 24 deaths of people who had the virus. 8 were aged care residents. It says the outbreak is disproportionately affecting older, more vulnerable people and is urging people to be vaccinated and boosted in an effort to slow down the spread. The same data shows while just under 3% of those aged 12 years and over haven't had a dose, the unvaccinated make up more than 15% of hospitalisations. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is thanking the Prime Ministers of Poland, the Czech Republic and Slovenia for travelling to Kiev to meet him despite the continuing bombardment by Russian forces. The Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki says Ukraine can count on the help of its friends.
The European Union has to invite Ukraine to the European Union and all the defensive weapons to defend your homes. We will never leave you alone, because we know that you are fighting not only for your homes, for your freedom, for your security, but also for ours.
Mr. Zelensky later said peace talks with Russia are sounding more realistic, but more time is needed. In the latest attacks, Russian airstrikes killed 5 people in the capital, Kiev. Northland police say they've arrested a number of gang members after what they describe as a vicious and cowardly assault on a man in broad daylight on Kaikohe's main street. That attack on Monday was followed by a shooting in the town yesterday. A man was taken to hospital with moderate injuries. Police say they're also investigating 3 other firearms incidents this week. They all involve members of the tribesmen and Killabees gangs. 11 people have been arrested on firearms and drug-related charges. They're all men aged between 15 and 55 years old. Police have increased patrols around Kaikohe. The Abuse in Care Royal Commission has been told of workers ignoring or sometimes even encouraging violence in care homes. Natasha Emery today told the inquiry of her time in foster care and the Hamilton Girls' Home in the late 1980s. She says violence was everywhere at the Hamilton facility and staff often did nothing to intervene.
I was witness to a girl that was really savagely beaten, and when she was found, I heard one of the staff members say she was being too mouthy. And she was there for like an hour before any medical aid came to her. The staff definitely didn't seem fazed. I didn't see any compassion, anything really.
Natasha Emery says sometimes staff would encourage physical abuse as a means of control. To sport, and only one domestic Super Rugby Pacific game will go ahead this weekend as COVID continues to ravage the competition. COVID outbreaks in the Blues, Highlanders and Crusaders have forced a change in the schedule, as sports editor Stephen Hewson reports.
Moana Pacifica will now play the Chiefs at Mount Smart Stadium in Auckland on Saturday night. Moana Pacifica had been scheduled to play the Highlanders in Dunedin, and the Blues were due to play the Crusaders in Christchurch, while the Hurricanes were hosting the Chiefs in Wellington. However, with Moana Pacifica having only played one game so far this season, New Zealand Rugby's decided to reschedule their previously postponed game against the Chiefs, leaving the Hurricanes without a match. New Zealand Rugby, though, is confident that all postponed games will eventually be played.
The Warriors won't be returning early to Mount Smart Stadium despite the government moving forward the border reopening for Australians. Club CEO Cameron George says they made a commitment to the players and the NRL to stay in Australia until the back end of the season.
It'd be no use going home and playing in front of no one. That just makes zero sense because economically it makes no sense. But the most important thing is the reason we want to go home is that we can have everyone hanging off the rafters and having a party. And if we can't have a crowd of more than 100 people, it would be foolish to take a game back there.
The Warriors' first home game is July 3rd. And defending champions England, winless after their first 3 games of the Women's Cricket World Cup, have rolled India for 134 in their latest match in Mount Maunganui. England's run chase has just started, and Manchester United have been eliminated from the Football European Champions League last 16. That's the news.
Christopher Luxon going strong in the polls.
We weren't, in recent times, but now the New Zealand public do trust us.
Jacinda Ardern is going for broke to stop him.
As well as today's announcement on the border, the government has said it's deciding in the next week what changes there will be to vaccine passes, mandates and the traffic light system.
And Simon Bridges is just gone.
And I almost said yesterday, I lost my mojo, but actually that's not true. I still have fire in my belly for the things in politics.
The Ups and Downs Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're on Checkpoint with Lisa Owen next. But first, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. For Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, partly cloudy, isolated showers in Northland, possibly heavy today. The chance of a light shower elsewhere. Waikato, Waitomo, Taumarunui, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Fine weather. Taranaki and Taihape to Kapiti Coast. Partly cloudy, isolated showers for eastern Taihape as well as South Taranaki tomorrow morning. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Wellington. Mostly cloudy, scattered showers easing south of Hawke's Bay this evening. For Nelson and Marlborough, mainly fine. Showers about Marlborough Coast clearing tomorrow afternoon. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, fine apart from isolated afternoon and evening showers inland, but also about the coast in Bulla. For Canterbury, mostly cloudy, showers mainly inland are clearing tomorrow morning. Otago and Southland, mostly cloudy near the east coast, with patchy drizzle there tomorrow morning, otherwise mainly fine. And the Chatham Islands are cloudy. It's 7 minutes past 5. We'll have news headlines for you at 5:30.
Kia ora rā e ho, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. New Zealand is ready to welcome the world back. That's the message from the Prime Ministerial podium as the country's reopening is accelerated. The timeline for easing border restrictions has again been brought forward. Vaccinated Australians are now welcome from April the 13th. Vaccinated travellers from other visa waiver countries, such as the United Kingdom and United States, can start arriving from May the 2nd. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch, with this report.
Lower the drawbridge and roll out the red carpet. Fortress New Zealand is soon to reopen to tourists.
We're ready to welcome the world back.
For 2 years, the country has been sealed off from the world. The border closed to most foreigners, bar a brief bubble or two. The goal was to keep out COVID-19, but now it's here and running rampant. There's little reason to keep up the defences.
We are a safe place to visit, and New Zealand will be ready with open arms.
The initial plan was to reopen from July. This brings that forward 3 months. From April the 13th, vaccinated Australians are welcome back. Not long after, May the 2nd, come those from visa waiver countries. That includes the United States, Canada and the United Kingdom. Travellers will need to take a supervised pre-departure test before heading our way, and then 2 more RATs after arriving. The new plan captures Australia's school holidays and comes well in advance of the winter ski season.
We are reopening, and I'm asking our Australian family and friends to book their tickets.
Fingers crossed for a really good snow year. I can't wait.
Laura Headley is General Manager of Cardrona and Treble-Cone. She's thrilled at today's news after a turbulent few years. Australians used to make up nearly a third of their visitors. She wants them back.
The Australians have had a pretty unfortunate run over the last couple of years and haven't really got to ski too much, and I know there's a lot of passionate Aussies out there waiting for a good ski season. It'd be cool to see that lot back.
The same sentiment from Nick Kiddle, the coordinator of the Lakes District Accommodation Sector. He expects a sudden surge, with business returning to 70 or 80% of normal trade by the end of the year.
Exactly where we need to be. We've got some clear dates around the opening of the border. This allows us to plan for our businesses, potentially employ more people back into the business, and look forward to being able to service our debts.
Tim Malone from House of Travel Albany expects massive interest from international tourists, but warns some may be put off by high airfares and the continuing COVID-19 restrictions.
We still have things like vaccine passports required into restaurants and those sorts of things, and from a lot of countries in the world, they're just not used to that still.
That may not be an obstacle for long. A Cabinet is reviewing the use of the traffic light system, vax passes and mandates, with an announcement expected next week.
We know COVID is still with us and will be with us for some time, but we are ready to safely move into a new chapter of our management of the pandemic.
For now, though, that new chapter doesn't include tourists from countries which require a visa to travel to New Zealand. Countries like China and India. Their timeline continues to be October. National says that's incompetent and will hurt migrants cut off from family members abroad.
Those split migrant families will not be able to be reunited until October. This is a stain on the conscience of New Zealand.
We will be reviewing whether or not we can bring forward some of those dates also. The major issue there is not a question of safety, but a question of the ability to process those new visas in a timely way.
More details on that in the coming weeks. Yet another announcement to come.
So the welcome mat is out for tourists, but it could be another 4 years before Aotearoa's back to pre-COVID visitor numbers. And the industry says it'll need extra financial help despite today's border announcement. Vaxxed Aussies, as you heard, can travel to New Zealand from April 13th in time for their school holidays in our lucrative ski season. And the door opens to vaccinated travellers from visa waiver countries, including the US and UK, from May 2nd. But the Tourism Export Council reckons it's going to be a slow burn. Chief Executive Linda Keane joins us now. Kia ora, Linda.
Oh, kia ora, Lisa.
So was it a sigh of relief or a sigh of disappointment for you when you heard this announcement?
I think definitely a sigh of relief. The international tourism sector has been very patient because we knew Omicron had to work its way through things. But we're really delighted and thrilled that we've got some very clear dates from the Prime Minister. And it's important the Prime Minister has made the announcement because our offshore travel partners need an official notification from the government before they can then talk with their travel partners and then bring our lovely visitors back to New Zealand. So good news, great start, still got a long way to go.
So what kind of demand are you expecting? Aussies first.
The demand's first going to come from the visiting friends and relatives market in Australia and the ski and snowboard market. So we will see a quick uptake out of Australia. Then things are going to flatten a little bit because our long-haul markets like UK, Europe, US, Southeast Asian countries, they don't traditionally travel until the October start of the season. So we'll have a nice little flood of bookings coming in through from Australia, but there's still some way to go because it takes time for the prospective visitor and our offshore travel partners to get the bookings in the system so that they can convert and commit to be here on the ground in October.
OK, Linda, so I've got this clear. You're expecting a bit of a sugar hit from the Australians. Yes. They're short haul, they'll come straight away. Even though we are opening up in the first couple of days of May to waiver countries, it's off-peak for them to travel here. Is that what you're saying? So they won't come for months, probably?
Yes, that's correct. What you said is right. There could be some visiting friends and relatives, travellers from those longer haul markets, high net worth travellers that have time and money on their side that may begin to come through this winter. But most Northern Hemisphere visitors, because June, July, August are their summer months, they may go to a summer destination rather than come here to New Zealand. So we've got some work to do, but we're ready.
So if that is the case, and there is going to be another dry patch until later in the year, what more financial support does the industry need? Because obviously there is the recent COVID support payment. What is wrong with that?
Yes, for the international tourism businesses, because the criteria for the COVID support payment is referencing a 22 versus a 2021 payment period, most of our international tourism businesses were either trading on zero in 2021 or only 20% of what they originally used to trade at. So they can't show a 40% reduction. So we're hoping that the government will look at a targeted package for international tourism businesses, or to make the Kickstart Fund that was allocated for 5 regions be across all regions in New Zealand.
What are your forecasts showing in terms of the market returning? 3.9 million arrivals pre-COVID. When will we get back there?
It's going to take us about 4 years to get back there. So within the next 12 months, all things going according to plan, we expect about 56% of visitors to be here by May 2023, then 70% the following year and 83% the year after. So it is going to take 4 years for us to rebuild.
Do we want them all back, Linda?
I think if you're a business owner, most certainly that you would like them back. There are many communities that have lost fire station staff and school teachers, that have been highly impacted with the loss of a tourism offering. So I think the answer to that is yes. Can we do things better? Absolutely. And there's a lot of work that's gone in behind the scenes to ensure the offering is going to meet all expectations by visitors.
Because, we're already getting text messages saying we were having too many people, they're trashing our environment, we don't want them all back.
Yes. So there's a lot of work that's been done, certainly from a social licence perspective across the regions and with the private sector, to try to get back that social licence. And I think that the impact of COVID in those smaller communities was felt from a volume perspective pre-COVID, but now that they've had 2 years of zero visitors from international markets, there's a lot of plans in place now to mitigate any future congestion or problems that were identified pre-border closure.
The Prime Minister said today to your industry, thank you for the hard yards you did on behalf of all of us. Did that mean anything to your industry?
Oh, it meant a huge amount. We have felt like, even though we've been a vocal industry, we've had to be vocal to ensure we're not forgotten. And it would have meant a huge amount to a lot of business owners that have found it really, really tough. The anxiety levels and stress levels have been very, very difficult for everyone to deal with. So I think it would have meant a lot to everyone.
Appreciate your time this evening. Thanks for joining us, Linda. That's Linda Keane from the Tourism Export Council. It is almost 18 minutes past 5. Kia mau tono mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. A stark warning from GPs today. A visit to the clinic is going to get more difficult as they face a major shortage. The Royal College of General Practitioners says more medical students need to be trained as GPs to help a workforce in crisis. Rachel Graham has more.
Motueka's Greenwood Health closed its books to new patients a year ago because of a shortage of GPs. Clinical manager Naomi Rosamond says they had hoped that would only last a couple of months. But in fact, the pressure has only become worse.
We've lost a number of GPs, not been able to replace them, and we just don't see any other avenue except external recruitment to New Zealand, because we have tried our damnedest to try and get local GPs to join the practice.
Naomi Rosamond says there's more than 500 people on their waiting list. A report commissioned by the Royal New Zealand College of General Practitioners shows there are 74 GPs for every 100,000 people, much lower than in Australia and Canada. Compounding matters, half of the current GPs plan on retiring in the next 10 years. College President Dr Samantha Merton says the profession does have an older age base, and not enough is being done to encourage medical students to consider becoming a GP.
These students don't get a chance to see what the environment that they'll be working in will be like before they actually leave a hospital and go into that environment. And then support for students as far as their pay. If you're a registrar in a hospital and then you're going to go out and be a registrar in the community, that you take a pay cut.
Samantha Merton says the implications for the depleting number of GPs are serious, with more people ending up in hospital if conditions escalate. Auckland University's Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Medical and Health Sciences, Warwick Bagg, says increasing the cap of medical students at Auckland University from 257 to 300 would also help ease the pressure.
We're also very interested in a concept we've been talking about for some time, which is a National School of Interprofessional Rural Health, where we combine with other universities to deliver rural health general practice training.
Chief Executive of the New Zealand Rural General Practice Network, Grant Davidson, says the shortages are already particularly pronounced in the rural areas. Many GPs are delaying retirement because there's no one to replace them. Others are burnt out and just abandoning their clinics.
We're suggesting that just as they do in northern Canada and Australia, we have special rural general practice and rural nurse training, and the training is done in rural areas so that people are immersed in those communities as they train and tend to stay there.
In a statement, the Minister of Health, Andrew Little, said there is no doubt the country needs more GPs. He said the government will fund as many people who apply to train as GPs. Last year, there were 210 first-year GP trainees, the highest number there's ever been. He said he has received the Royal College of GPs workforce report and is considering its findings.
Ho mai o whakaro, do send us your feedback. Nō reira ānei nā kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. Are you keen to see tourists return to New Zealand? What does it mean for your business or your town? And do we want the same number of people back as we had pre-COVID? Also interested to hear about the situation with GPs in your part of the motu. Have you managed to register with one? Are you struggling to get an appointment? As you were hearing there, they're saying it's a crisis situation with a major shortage. Pātui mai, text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. There's been a car pile up on the southern motorway in Auckland and it's heading south just before Highbrook Drive. So just a warning, 2 lanes are blocked there, so expect delays and take care if you are driving that way. There's a glimmer of hope for peace in Ukraine after President Volodymyr Zelensky conceded NATO membership is unlikely for his country. He says peace talks with Russia are beginning to sound more realistic, but the reality on the ground in Ukraine is that the fighting and bombardment of cities continues. Andrew McRae reports.
This is day 24 of the war, and while there seems to be some hope in the air, the heartbreak and devastation continues. It's early morning in Kiev, and the city's in the middle of a 35-hour curfew as Russian forces move ever closer. Here's a resident awoken by a powerful blast in the night.
Saw from my window that the building was on fire. A friend of mine lives on the 14th floor of the building. I think she must have died because she's bedridden.
Could I ask you, are you afraid now of what's happening here in Kiev?
Of course I'm afraid. I'm really scared.
Mariupol has been under constant bombardment in the last week, and conditions for those trapped there are desperate. Russia has refused to let aid trucks in, but 20,000 people have managed to get out in convoys of private cars. Svetland is one of them.
The situation in the city was very tense, and then we made a decision. A group of people from houses that had been destroyed, blown up and were in ruins. We got together and we used private cars, and within the space of half an hour we packed our bags and we left.
There was a hint from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky of what might be part of any deal with Russia, a move away from joining the NATO military alliance.
Ukraine is not a member of NATO. We have heard for years that the doors were open, but we also heard that we could not join. It's a truth, and it must be recognised.
President Zelensky thanked the Prime Ministers of Poland, the Czech Republic and Slovenia for travelling to Kiev to meet him, despite the continued bombardment by Russian forces. He said the visit to the capital at such a difficult time was greatly appreciated.
At a time when even many ambassadors have left Ukraine because of the full-scale Russian invasion of the land, these respected people, these leaders of their beautiful independent European states are not afraid of anything, but are more afraid for our fate. I am sure that with such friends, with such countries and neighbours and partners, we can definitely win.
NATO is planning an emergency summit in Brussels next week. Its Secretary-General, Jens Stoltenberg, says Russia could be gearing up for a false flag attack.
They are making absurd claims about biological labs and chemical weapons in Ukraine. This is just another lie, and we are concerned that Moscow could stage a false flag operation, possibly including chemical weapons.
The UN says the number of refugees who have fled Ukraine has now crossed the 3 million mark. Secretary-General Antonio Guterres says with each passing hour, it's clear the situation is only getting worse, and whatever the outcome, there will be no winners.
The prospect of nuclear conflict, accident or design threatens all of humanity. The prospect of nuclear conflict, once unthinkable, is now back within the realm of possibility. It's time to stop the horror unleashed on the people of Ukraine and get on the path of diplomacy and peace.
At the United Nations, the Russian envoy said Moscow would end what it calls its special military operation when its goals were achieved, including the demilitarisation of Ukraine.
The lights were out far and wide in the Thames Coromandel and even part of the Hauraki district for several hours today, costing some businesses big time. All because of a chunk of wayward plastic that wound itself around a transformer, creating a potential fire hazard. And that meant flicking the switch off for an extraction job. So it was a frantic start to the day for Bay Bakery in Whitianga, selling their precious hot goods for half the price to avoid the bin.
Yeah, we just put everything half price and sold out of all that stuff and then picked up and then just had to write it down so that we can work it all out later. Yeah, we sold out pretty quick of everything. If we had known earlier, we would have just not opened today. We had all of our staff on that, thought they were going to get a whole day's work.
Others like Manaia Cafe and Bar in Taurua had to keep their doors shut.
Well, we're closed. We can't open. I think most people are closed. I think the dress shop is open. The Four Square is open because they have a generator. So it's a beautiful day here. Probably going to head to the beach.
So joining us now is Transpower's Mark Ryle. Kia ora, Mark. Is the power back on to all those areas?
Kia ora, yes it is.
And how long was it off for in total?
It was approximately 4 hours, maybe a little bit longer for some areas as Powerco restored our network.
Yeah, and how many businesses and households are we talking about here?
It was approximately up to 27,000 ICPs, which are connection points, so households and businesses.
Right, so you heard from those businesses there, a lot of them put out, had to shut up shop, sell goods at half price. Is there any compensation for them?
I'll firstly absolutely apologise for the event. Obviously, as you're aware, there was plastic from a market garden got blown and tangled around the transmission lines. Look, I guess from the situation, we did our best to make the most of a bad situation and make it safe and ensure that the lines didn't go out in an unplanned fashion. So from a compensation perspective, that's not sort of with Transpower. In this case, it's someone to talk to their retailer as the first port of call.
Right, so it's not your problem, in essence, that part.
No, there's a process and the customer's connection is through with the retailer, so they need to get in touch with their retailer and the retailer will take it from there.
So this is a chunk of plastic that you say came from a market garden. I mean, what does that say about the resilience of the system if that takes out the power to tens of thousands of people for hours on end?
So the Coromandel areas on our network is supplied by a twin transmission line, 2 circuits. Unfortunately, the plastic was wrapped around both those circuits. It's rather unfortunate. It is a really reliable line, and that's reliable. The supply through the Coromandel on that line is very reliable. Transmission circuits are. It was a very unfortunate circumstance. It's very rare.
When you say it was wrapped around 2 circuits, explain that to me, because I'm looking at a picture right now, which is like a giant power pole, which is wrapped in a long strip of plastic. How did that out your entire system in that area? Because it looks pretty flimsy.
So the tower has 2 separate circuits on. So there's one line, or one transmission line up to the Coromandel area. On that line, there's 2 individual circuits that supply the area. Unfortunately, the way the plastic was wrapped across both those circuits, we couldn't, and onto the tower, we couldn't remove it live with the power on. We actually have to take the circuits out to make it safe to remove it. If we hadn't removed it, there's a good chance it could catch on fire and then drop to the ground and could cause a fire in the area. Also, it could have caused the tripping in an unplanned fashion, which would have taken longer to restore.
So what about the market garden? Have you spoken to them? And how was it that this bit of plastic is wafting about?
Yes, we have spoken with them. We need to follow up with them following the event.
So is the market garden directly under where this power line is in the transformer?
It's quite close in the vicinity. I'm not sure of the exact logistics, but it certainly is nearby.
And what have they said to you exactly about how this happened?
Oh, they were good. They let us know about it. And then we moved from there to make the situation safe. So they're very apologetic, and we'll work with them following the event.
So they are the ones that notified you?
Yes, I believe so.
And so how did this bit of plastic blow away?
I don't have those details at this point in time.
And when you say you're going to work with them, what do you mean? Are you expecting some kind of compensation from them?
We'll have discussions and work with the landowner offline. I can't say what the exact outcome will be.
But what do you mean by work with them? What's there to work on? A compensation arrangement?
Well, we'll follow up with them and make sure that there's things in place and stop the event ever occurring again. And we'll go through that process with them as well around any cost.
So do you send them a bill for call out for the power outage, for the maintenance to the lines? Do they get a bill for that, Mark?
We'll work with them following the event. Our priority today has been getting the hazard removed and then getting the lights back on for everybody, and then we'll follow up in the coming days.
Thanks for joining us. That is Mark Ryle from Transpower. Kia ora e te iwi, haere haki anei, i a checkpoint. The welcome mat's out for tourists, but how will they get here with international air routes slashed? Still, it's a hallelujah moment for many Auckland businesses, and we talked to a few of them. And the 85-year-old finally retiring. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. You can get in touch on text 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
New Zealand's border will reopen in time for the Australian school holidays, Easter, Anzac Day and the ski season. The government's brought forward the original border reopening timeline by 2 months. Tourists from visa waiver countries will be allowed in from May the 2nd, but Australians can arrive from April the 13th. The Tourism Minister, Stuart Nash, says Australians traditionally make up 40% of international visitors. Around 1 million rapid antigen tests are being provided to schools and early childhood centres for symptomatic children, staff and people in their households. The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, says the goal is to keep schools and early learning centres open. He says the advice he has received from the education sector is that greater access to rapid antigen testing could help them to do that. Meanwhile, Mr Hipkins has COVID-19 and has tweeted a photo of his positive rapid antigen test. He's now isolating for 7 days. 971 people are in hospital with COVID-19, the highest daily total to date, and 24 more people have died with the virus. 8 of the deaths were at residential care facilities. The Ministry of Health says the average stay in hospital for COVID-19 patients in the northern region is lengthening and the average age increasing. The latest update also shows there are 19,542 new community cases today. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says peace talks with Russia are beginning to sound more realistic. His comments come as Poland calls for a peacekeeping mission to the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. And a report for the Royal College of General Practitioners claims the shortage of doctors will only worsen in the coming years as more GPs retire. One health clinic in Motueka says it stopped taking on new patients more than a year ago because of the shortage. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Nā mihi iwi no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku hoa inainei ko Nona Peltier, who is here to talk business. Nona, let's start with Briscoe Group. They've made another strong full-year profit. And so what are their numbers showing?
Yeah, their net profit increased 20. And that was to $87.9 million. That's a big, hefty profit given the disruptions over the past year. They had a number of days where their stores were closed, and that's not just in Auckland but across the country. And so in the end, their revenue rose 6%. Their profit margins also increased, and the managing director, Rod Duke, and this is for Briscoe's, is not just homewares, it's also living and giving and Rebel Sport. So the overall group, he said, has performed really well. They carried an additional $20 million worth of inventory over the past year, and that was so that they could control any disruptions to the supply chain. So they were able to offer their customers a full range of products over the period, and he said that certainly helped. He's expecting that type of strategy to play out all the rest of this year. He said consumers should be expecting prices to rise, not just because of fuel and not just because of supply chain disruptions, but because of inflation and the value of the New Zealand dollar, because almost all the goods they bring in, of course, they're all imported and they're all paid for in US dollars.
And Nona, with the welcome mat being rolled out by the government today for tourists, the market has had a positive reaction to that. What are the companies that are benefiting?
Well, let's just start with Auckland Airport, and it ended down 1.1%, but I'm pretty sure that had to do with some profit taking because it had a real turbulent ride today. They opened at $7.28. They reached all the way up to $7.39. That's a 1.5% gain before falling back 8 cents to end down, 1.1%. So overall, a bit of a ride for Auckland Airport, but the other companies that have benefited directly from the reopening of the border sooner than later is Air New Zealand. Their share price up 2.1%. Tourism Holdings, 1.8% up. Sky City, 3.2% up. And Millennium and Copthorne Hotels, 0.9%. And all of them put out statements saying, yippee, we're raring and ready to go. Just bring on the tourists. They're excited that they've got some certainty. We've also had some other statements from different groups saying that now the next thing they want is a pathway to the orange lights. So I don't think we have heard the last from the sector, but certainly it was a pretty happy day for most. And the NZX Top 50 Index, it closed up 72 points. That's a gain of 0.6%. And the New Zealand dollar is fairly steady at 67.6 US cents, 94.1 Australian and 51.8 British pence. And I should say that's ahead of the US Federal Reserve coming out tomorrow, or really overnight, with its decision on interest rates. The market's certainly going to be watching out for that.
Thanks, Nona. Ka kite, that's Nona Peltier with our business news. Aotearoa's ready to welcome back the world, but how are they going to get here? The number of international carriers coming into the country has slimmed down considerably since COVID hit. In February, Auckland International Airport told Checkpoint that flight movements in 2021 had slumped to levels seen 35 years ago, with destination options virtually halved from 43 to 22. So how long will it take to fire up on hibernating routes, and at what cost? Justin Tai-Umbers from the Board of Airline Representatives joins us now. Kia ora, Justin.
Hi, Lisa.
So are planes being dragged out of the desert and dusted off as we speak?
Here's hoping, and hopefully they've got New Zealand firmly in their sights now. Look, I think there's a lot of aircraft have been pulled back out of the desert. One of the future challenges that's just starting to emerge is actually getting people back into the industry as well. About a third of the staff at airlines got laid off, and they're highly technical, skilled and trained people. And it's actually proving to be a little bit of a challenge to get them back. But we're hoping to see a good capacity injection come certainly in time for next summer.
Yeah, and I suppose they'll need recertification and the like, won't they?
Yeah, it is. It's generally about a 3-month process, I think, certainly for getting the aircraft back up and running from long storage. And then also, getting cockpit crews retrained and cabin crew. That can take a good number of weeks just to get there. But it's certainly be underway.
Do you fear that some routes have already been locked and loaded and they do not include New Zealand? So airlines will be bringing back staff, but they're sending them somewhere other than Aotearoa.
Look, that absolutely has been the risk. But look, I'm delighted that the message did get brought forward to today, and also in time for the school holidays. So what we've been saying is that right now all of the airline headquarters have been setting up their routes ready for our next summer, and they're right on the cusp of locking those in. So we actually have just made it in the nick of time, I think. We're hopeful that there'll some North American carriers that they'll recommence seasonal flights coming into from October. Certainly on the Tasman, it's a different story. We've seen a huge volume of flights now being put into the Tasman right from the school holidays, so it's a great injection.
Is it going to be as easy to get to New Zealand when these airlines do fire back up, or are we essentially going to be on the milk run? Is it going to be a bit more complicated?
Look, I think it will be a gradual rebuild, and that's for a number of reasons, not least the Northern Hemisphere, North America and Europe. Look, their routes are performing really well. People are really starting to get back into travel, and aircraft are filling. When there is a shortage on aircraft and shortage on crews, they'll put them where they can fill them and fill them with certainty. So New Zealand does have a few challenges. That said, the airlines have stuck here for, through some really grueling conditions over the last 2 years. They want to maintain their routes. They want to grow them back. So being able to welcome back international visitors and having them fill their aircraft is a massive leap forward.
As we all know, we're in the grips of a fuel crisis at the moment, right? And there's potentially a smaller market of people wanting to travel, even though there is some enthusiasm there. So what can people expect in terms of prices?
Yeah, look, that's definitely some headwinds that the airline industry could have done without at the moment. So, look, the war in Eastern Europe, it's a humanitarian catastrophe that's playing out before our eyes, but it's also something that couldn't have come at a worse time for the airlines in terms of getting this recovery back on their feet. A number of them, they hedge their fuel prices. That'll shelter them for a little while. But there's been a 20% climb in jet fuel over the last month and 80% over the last year. So, look, that will have an impact on airfares. It won't be a quick run back to the incredibly low prices that we saw, in 2019, just before COVID.
Justin, could you put a number on it? I mean, so that's the fuel situation. There's that, and then there's the bringing the planes out, all the costs that they've been carrying, reigniting, hibernating staff, all of that stuff. So, could you say, it's going to be probably 5% more, 10%, 15% more to get to destination X than it was before COVID?
Yeah, sure. Look, it is very difficult to say, but some of the local airlines operating here, so they've gone up 5% or 7%. So I think that's indicative of the kind of lift that we're likely to see in the short term. That said, I think what people can do is, now that we've got the announcement out that our borders are open, there's plenty of capacity in the system and more coming. Airlines will be wanting to fill their aircraft, so they'll put out some great early bird specials. So I think people just need to shop around and look ahead, book as early as they can, and there will still be some good deals to be had.
Prime Minister said today that increased air travel capacity will mean more space for freight and that we can expect lower freight costs. How long do you think realistically before we see that filtering through?
Yeah, look, that's a very important point, and about 80% of our air freight's carried in passenger flights, so hugely important for our export sector. In reality, I think because airlines have locked in their schedules through until October, on the long-haul routes, we won't see too much additional capacity brought on board. That will start to filter through in October. Might get a little bit here and there, but not too much extra. With the Tasman, however, that will be, as I said earlier, there's a huge number of flights being put on the Tasman, so that should have an effect at actually lowering some of the air freight costs.
Thanks for your time this evening, Justin. That is Justin Tai Umbers joining us there and his reckons on what's going to happen with, the airline industry. Bay of Islands businesses are getting ready to say haere mai to tourists in Paihia, where jobs and livelihoods are hanging by a thread. The earlier opening dates are just the news locals needed. Nita Blake-Person spoke to business owners following today's announcement.
On a perfect autumn day in Paihia, the streets are quiet and the restaurants and shops are almost empty.
It's lovely, hardly anybody here. It's very nice.
But while some domestic visitors have enjoyed having the place to themselves, the lack of international tourists has caused a world of pain for businesses.
This is my daughter's shop. We can't afford wages at the moment. We're open 10:30 to 1, 7 days a week, just to get a little bit to pay the rent, because mothers don't get wages.
Karen Knight is working at her daughter's clothing store, Suma Suma. She gets emotional talking about how hard it's been financially, but says the border opening is a huge relief.
You know, they talk about Queenstown. Everybody's hurting in New Zealand, but we only have a summer season anyway. Winter, you could shoot a gun up the main street. So with no summer season, with no tourists and no summer, no cruise ships, no people, it's brutal.
Karen says while the past couple of years have been tough, she knows others around town have had it much worse.
There's a couple you can see empty places around where they haven't made it. Some of them are up to the ears in debt. Auckland's worse. You know, there's lots of places worse, but yeah, it's brutal. Some of them are mortgaging themselves to the hilt. You know, it is what it is. But yeah, it's very important that it opens, and everybody here, we should have a big street party.
Elliot works with Parasail Bay of Islands and says the return of international tourists is a mental boost for local tourist operators.
The whole of New Zealand struggled in various ways, so nobody's worse off than anybody else. I just think as long as everybody stays positive, it's that light at the end of the tunnel gets a bit brighter.
But he says it's still far too early to be making business projections.
You couldn't compare the last 2 years to each other, let alone compare to pre-COVID times. Pre-COVID times, a completely different story for the whole town, for the whole of the Bay of Islands.
Before the pandemic, tourism was Northland's third largest industry, so most Paihia locals will be welcoming visitors back with open arms.
I think make the most of it. Yeah, I've got nothing against tourists coming over and seeing a beautiful country and how good we're doing here.
It could be good for the economy, but at the same time we're still fighting the COVID.
Getting the tourists back will get the town back to normal again, and we can stop hiding away from the rest of the world.
It could have been done a bit earlier probably, but yeah, I think it's good that it's happening at least.
In just under 4 weeks, Australians will be making their way across the Tasman, and Paihia's ready with a warm welcome.
It is 14 minutes to 6. Let's get to some of your feedback now on the border. Not feeling too positive about it from the feedback we're getting. Haven't we decided that tourist numbers pre-COVID were unsustainable? I don't think we want to be going back to that, says Ray. Another person says, yippee, we're ratcheting up our low-wage tourist industry. And this one, climate crisis. We don't want millions of people travelling all over the globe. Just a reminder, it's a $41 billion industry, 5.5% of our GDP, and it is responsible for employing 8% of our national workforce. He aho o whakaaro. What do you reckon? Get in touch. Text us on 2101. Families will soon be able to get rapid antigen tests from schools and early childhood centres. The government's providing nearly 1 million RAT kits in a bid to keep education going as the Omicron variant surges through the country. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
Schools and early childhood centres are reporting thousands of COVID cases every day. Now the government's sending them hundreds of thousands of rapid antigen tests to give to staff, children and families with symptoms of the virus. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says it will make it easier for many people to get their hands on the tests when they need them.
Every parent will know that there will be a time or an occasion where their child may be perfectly fine when they go to school and then suddenly may come down with a fever, a sore throat or feel unwell. This is a really practical thing we can do to make it easy for families if their child, when they're sent home, goes home with a RAT and rapid antigen test for the family. It's just to make it easier.
In Wellington, where 86% of schools have children or teachers away with COVID, the tumuaki or leader of Te Kura Kopapa Māori o Ngā Mokopuna, Rawiri Wright, says it's a good move. He'd know because the country's 66 kura kaupapa recently persuaded the government to provide them with tests which they've been sharing with whānau for a week already. Mr Wright says it helped his kura contain the spread of COVID.
Just by closing in the first instance and being able to have those rats to encourage whānau to test helped each whānau to better manage their own isolation and their awareness. So we hate to think what our numbers might have looked like.
In Auckland, the principal of Papatoetoe High School and president of the Secondary Principals Association, Vaughan Quio, has no problem with his school acting as a distribution centre for its families.
We've already started doing that with the rats that we have been able to get hold of. If we know that the family's got vehicular access issues, rather than making them go to a testing site, we've actually just been throwing 3 or 4 at them because it just makes sense. It's the right thing to do morally. And so I don't think there'll be too much pushback around that in the short term.
He says the tests are welcome, but he still wants the government to make it easier for teachers to leave isolation with sick family members if they test negative for COVID.
I've currently got in excess of 20 teachers sitting at home at the moment. About 9 or 10 of those have tested positive, certainly understand that, but there's 10 of them that are sitting at home just in case. It would be great, given that we're already wearing masks and already taking all sorts of precautions to make sure we limit spread. It would be great if those just in case people sitting at home could get back into work and we really only have to isolate if we are sick.
Early childhood centres can also use the government-supplied tests for surveillance testing of teachers at a rate of 2 tests per week per teacher. Kathy Wolfe from Te Rito Maioha, Early Childhood New Zealand, says it's overdue but very welcome.
It will absolutely help services and parents to manage how they keep their services open, how children can attend the services and just keep everybody safe.
She says early childhood staffing is in chaos because of the pandemic.
Warriors fans will still have to wait until July to see an NRL game played in Auckland, despite the government's decision to allow Australians into the country early. Club CEO Cameron George says they made a commitment to players, families and the NRL to be in Australia until the second half of the season.
We can't now turn around and backflip just because the government start moving the goalpost every second month or every second week at this stage. We have broadcasting commitments, stadium commitments, and so on that we've locked in. And then what underpins all of that is at this point in time, you can't even have crowds in New Zealand. So there's no use trying to guess what the government's going to do because that's been a failing of everyone's for the last 3 years.
George says bringing games home under current red light settings would be foolish.
It'd be no use going home and playing in front of no one. That just makes zero sense because economically it makes no sense. But the most important thing is the reason we want to go home is that we can have everyone hanging off the rafters and having a party at Mount Smart Stadium. And if we can't have a crowd of more than 100 people, it would be foolish management to take a game back there.
Meanwhile, the Wellington Phoenix football teams say the announcement brings them a step closer to playing at home, but they still need to overcome visa exemptions for international players and changes to the COVID protection framework to host crowds. And the New Zealand Breakers have committed to seeing out the National Basketball League season in Aussie. COVID is running through the Super Rugby teams with all 3 games postponed this weekend because of cases in the Blues, Highlanders and Crusaders. There'll now just be 1 game this weekend between the Chiefs and Moana Pacifica. Meanwhile, the Pulse will finally get their ANZ Premiership netball season underway this weekend, but without their coach on the sideline. The Wellington-based side had at least half a dozen cases of COVID rip through the team in the lead up to the competition. Bridget Tunnicliffe reports.
Pulse coach Yvette McCausland-Jury was about to head to training this morning when she tested positive at home. In her absence, High Performance Director Waimarama Tomonu will take the reins for the Pulse's first 2 ANZ Premiership games in Porirua this weekend. The former Silver Ferns coach has been involved in several pre-seasons, but none quite like this.
This morning was a huge surprise, but it shouldn't have been. People are going to get sick. We've had most of our team down with the virus now. And we've had plans in place. So I found out at 10 o'clock this morning that we didn't have a head coach and I was it for the first weekend, but you just get on with it.
The Pulse are playing catch-up after their first round game had to be postponed last week because so many in the team were recovering from COVID. Pulse mid-quarter Whitney Souness says they all got hit with COVID about the same time.
We were always contacting each other, being like, how do you feel this morning? How are you feeling today? So we were always sharing how our experiences were going, and some of us had it bad, lost taste and got, really bad headaches and all that. But some of us didn't feel anything at all. So glad that we're past that now and we're kind of ready to go for the weekend.
Tomonu says all 10 players are available for the double header at this stage. They will also have a couple of players from their second tier squad available. She says the players who were affected by COVID appear to have recovered well.
People are a little bit tired. We have managed their load as they've come in, but we're reaching the point now where we're getting back to full loads for most of them. And so far we've been really fortunate. People are responding well. They were fit and healthy before they got sick and they're coming back pretty quickly. So we've been lucky so far, but it is a very individual thing.
The Pulse only had 1 or 2 players able to attend practice sessions last week, and Tomonu says the netball might not be pretty this weekend, but everyone is just keen to play. Whitney Sooners says they are lucky that the veteran coach can step in and they are already familiar with her as a specialist coach. Sooners, who experienced a few of the nastier effects of COVID, is relieved it's behind her now.
First 5 days were probably the worst for me. I did end up losing my taste, but I've kind of slowly got that back now. Just kind of really feeling really tired and just felt like I had done a whole bunch of training sessions and just didn't have any energy. So it's kind of just that feeling for almost a week. So glad that's over.
The Pulse are one of the youngest sides in this year's competition with an average age of just 21. The side includes co-captain Tiana Matuaro, the daughter of Tomonu, who says she's enjoying working with the group.
The fun, they're pretty loud. And we're just really keen to do the best we can, and that's what we're going to do this weekend. We're excited, a little bit nervous, but really keen to play and see what we can do and make the great use of the enthusiasm that youth brings.
The Pulse meet the Northern Mystics on Saturday and the Waikato Bay of Plenty Magic on Sunday.
Here, kōrero ngā hautene. This next one's an interesting one. Kiwi Rail's oldest diesel shunt is rolling full steam ahead into retirement. The 85-year-old locomotive, known as TR56, is being replaced by a zero-emission electric shunt. Our reporter Somyam Bamidi-Pati and cameraman Angus Drever were at the farewell.
It's been moving trains in New Zealand since 1936 and has been based here at Hutt Workshops since the late 60s. But now the TR56 is ready for retirement. It's being replaced by a battery-powered shunt, which offers better control and lower emissions. Anthony Higginson leads the team that overhauls carriages. He spent 5 years working with the shunt and says while it's sad to see it go, he's stoked to have the new machine. He says the new shunt has wheels that move 360 degrees and are able to go off rail. It's also much safer. With the old ones, you would sit in the TR and operate it, but the new ones are, is that the control that you're holding there?
Yeah, that's the control, yeah. So you stand at the, it's a lot safer because you can be at the head of the movement and see everything and be where you need to be instead of relying on relaying information from the TR if you're behind the load, I guess, yeah. But no, it's a lot safer.
The new machine has been funded as part of the government's $1.6 billion investment into Kiwi Rail. Transport Minister Michael Wood says diesel trains have 70% fewer emissions than trucks carrying the same load. But only about 12% of New Zealand's freight is currently carried by rail.
It's incredibly important that Kiwi Rail continues to make the shift within its operations towards cleaner ways of generating its energy. But separate to that, every tonne of freight that we shift from other modes into Kiwi Rail and every carriage load of passengers that we bring into the Kiwi Rail and rail network, that is a massive saving in terms of carbon emissions in New Zealand as well. So there's a dual-fold benefit here in terms of giving Kiwi Rail the capacity to do its job.
Kiwi Rail's acting chief executive, David Gordon, says the state-owned enterprise is set to reach its goals of reducing 30% of emissions by 2030 and being net zero carbon by 2050. The company is expecting 57 fuel-efficient and low-emission trains to arrive in 2024 and 2 new ferries the following year to replace the current inter-islander fleet.
Our emissions are almost totally comprised of locomotives and ferries. Changing the ferries out does the 40% reduction. The type of locos we're running, even the one that's referred behind me, doesn't meet any real modern European standards. The ones we're buying from Stadler now are right down at the bottom level of emissions. So no, we're travelling okay.
Meanwhile, TR56 will be making its way to Silverstream Railway in Upper Hutt, where it'll be used to pull passenger carriages under the care of the Rail Heritage Trust. Executive Officer Barry O'Donnell says the Trust is excited to add the shunt to its collection. A former graphic designer, he's even created a colouring book commemorating the TR56. Why is it important to preserve it?
Well, again, because it's Kiwi Rail's oldest locomotive and arguably the oldest locomotive to ever work continuously for the National Railway network. So one other locomotive, a steam locomotive, worked for 93 years, but its time with railways was broken by working with the Public Works Department for a period of time.
And with that, a new era of rail transport is set in train.
Let's get to your feedback before 6. Not very many warm feelings about returning tourists. This one says inevitably some tourists will get Omicron while here. No travel insurance to cover COVID medical and hospital expenses. Can foresee whinging and more pressure on medical facilities. Perhaps tourists should be warned expenses must be paid up front. Another one says surely even the tourist industry must realise they're a major contributor to global warming.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The decimated tourism industry has been thrown a lifeline with the government accelerating New Zealand's border reopening plan. Vaccinated Australians will now be welcome from April the 13th and those from other visa waiver countries just over 2 weeks later. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
The new plan captures Australia's school holidays and comes in advance of the winter ski season. The Prime Minister's message is New Zealand is ready to welcome the world back. Not the whole world, though. The timeline leaves tourists from countries which require a visa waiting until October. Jacinda Ardern says that's due to the time required to process visas, but hints that start date could also be brought forward. Those who have eligible visas already can come from May.
Tourism businesses are expecting a lot of Australians coming into the country from next month, but not many longer haul travellers for 6 or 7 months. Tourism Export Council Chief Executive Linda Keane has told Checkpoint they expect a good number of Australians visiting friends and family as well as skiers.
Then things are going to flatten a little bit because our long-haul markets like UK, Europe, US, Southeast Asian countries, they don't traditionally travel until the October start of the season.
Linda Keane says they're not expecting pre-pandemic visitor numbers for 4 years. A South Island medical centre has more than 500 people on its waiting list because of a shortage of GPs. Motueka's Greenwood Health stopped taking on new patients a year ago. And a new report for the Royal College of General Practitioners indicates the doctor shortage will only get worse in the coming years. Greenwood Health's clinical manager, Naomi Rosamond, says they'd hoped the measures would only last a couple of months, but the pressure has got worse. She says they've lost a number of doctors to retirement or relocation, and the only ones they've been able to find are coming from overseas. Ms. Rosamond says it's very stressful for staff to have to turn away people who are seeking help. Families will soon be able to get rapid antigen tests from their children's schools and early childhood centres. The government's providing nearly 1 million test kits in a bid to keep education going. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
The tests are for school and early learning staff, pupils and their families who have COVID symptoms. Early childhood centres and special education units can also use them to surveillance test their staff for the virus twice a week. Principals and Early Childhood New Zealand say the tests will help them manage the outbreak, which is affecting thousands of children and teachers every day. But they're disappointed the government has not made it easier for teachers in isolation with sick family members to leave if they test negative for the virus.
The Ukrainian president says peace talks with Russia were beginning to sound more realistic, but he says more time's needed to reach a breakthrough. Volodymyr Zelensky says victory over Russia would require the work of all Ukrainian citizens, including the negotiating team that's been holding talks with the Russians via video link.
Everyone should work, including our representatives, our delegation, for negotiations with the Russian Federation. It is difficult, but important, as any war ends with an agreement. The meetings continue, and I am informed that the positions during the negotiations already sound more realistic, but time is still needed for the decisions to be in the interests of Ukraine.
The next round of talks takes place tonight, New Zealand time. The Abuse in Care Royal Commission has been told that staff ignored and sometimes encouraged violence in care homes. Natasha Emery has told the inquiry about her time in foster care and in the Hamilton Girls' Home in the late 1980s. She says violence was everywhere at the Hamilton facility and staff often did nothing to intervene. Ms Emery says she saw an attack on a girl where staff accused the victim of being lippy. It took an hour for medical help to arrive. Ms Emery says staff showed no empathy and sometimes encouraged physical abuse as a means of control. A man has been arrested after 2 elderly women were attacked and robbed in Hastings on Monday, leaving one seriously injured. Police believe the women may have been targeted because they'd won money on gambling machines. The man's due to appear in court tomorrow on charges including robbery. And in sport, only one domestic Super Rugby Pacific game will go ahead this weekend after COVID-19 outbreaks in the Blues, Highlanders and Crusaders squads. The only game that will be played is Moana Pacifica against the Chiefs in Auckland on Saturday night. The original schedule had the Highlanders playing host to Moana Pacifica in Dunedin, the Blues playing the Crusaders in Christchurch and the Hurricanes versus the Chiefs in Wellington. New Zealand Rugby hopes to reschedule the games. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Steve Asplin, a New Zealander who lived for a decade in Kiev. Now he and his family are refugees in Turkey. The BBC Crowd Science team attempts to gauge the efficacy of massage. I mean, it might feel good, but does it actually heal those tired and aching muscles? And our horror correspondent Denver Grinnell rates his favourite horror comedy movies on nights not screaming but laughing. With me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And you can listen again by going to rnz.co.nz. You're back with Lisa Owen and Checkpoint shortly. First, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. For Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, partly cloudy, isolated showers in Northland, possibly heavy today, a chance of a light shower elsewhere. For Waikato, Waitomo, Taumarunui, Bay of Plenty and Taupo, fine weather. Taranaki and Taihape to Kapiti Coast, partly cloudy, isolated showers for eastern Taihape as well as south Taranaki tomorrow morning. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also for Wellington, mostly cloudy, scattered showers easing south of Hawke's Bay this evening. Nelson and Marlborough mainly fine, showers about Marlborough Coast are clearing tomorrow afternoon. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland fine apart from isolated afternoon and evening showers inland, but also about the coast in Bulla. For Canterbury, mostly cloudy, showers mainly inland are clearing tomorrow morning. Otago and Southland, mostly cloudy near the east coast with patchy drizzle there tomorrow morning, otherwise mainly fine. And it's cloudy in the Chatham Islands. It's 6 minutes past 6. We'll have more news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora rā e hoa no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. It's the news. Auckland's downtown has been longing for open sesame. Tourism is coming back and sooner than expected. Vaccinated Australians are now welcome from April the 13th. Vaccinated travellers from other visa waiver countries such as the United Kingdom and United States can begin arriving from May the 2nd. But the city's restaurants and retailers say new challenges await with staff shortages and work from home orders still strangling their trade. We sent Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe to see how the upcoming grand opening is going down.
Nathan Chester is fired up. Fired up at the thought of shucking a few fresh bluffies for a table full of Aussies. Perhaps a few of his own country folk too.
We're ready to go. We're going to smash it, and I know the Shucker brothers will do it, and I will support the crew who I have, a short crew at the moment, and I feel we're going to smash everything. We're ready for it. I've got goosebumps already coming through because I know Shucker brothers, we can do it.
That's because in recent memory the chef de party's accent has been one of few foreign twangs to grace Shaka Brothers, the seaside eatery and oyster bar in Auckland's ferry terminal.
It's just been so tough for the Shuckers, and I feel like now if we get everybody coming back, I feel like we're going to be at the rock high for Shaka Brothers. I feel like we're going to be at the top whenever all these, even if we get the ships coming in, the cruise liners coming in for the Shuckers, it'll help.
Finally, Fortress New Zealand is shedding its shield, and earlier than initially announced. Aussies from April 13, everyone else from May 2. And Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says that will include the cruise ships crucial to Auckland's downtown, though timings still appear a little murky.
We haven't made those alterations formally to the border here today. Extra work that we need to go through, but we are expecting, of course, to bring forward the reopening for those borders as well.
But back on the streets of central Tāmaki Makaurau, the overriding feeling is relief, with a sprinkling of about time.
Today I worked out when the 2nd of May, when the majority of people start coming through, there'll be 775 days of full border closures. Australians are slightly less with a little bit of blip last year, but that is a long time with close to minimal revenue.
You think Hospo's battled? Richard Hanson owns Aotea Gifts, a chain of gift and souvenir shops.
We've been very, very exposed to those international travellers, so we're in the majority for the last 2 years we've been more than 90% down in our stores. On the online sort of stuff there's been a little bit more, but not hugely.
Now, finally, a glimmer of light at the end of what's been one very long tunnel, but a new challenge waits down the road.
Today we're going to start going through a list of all the people we need to rehire. So we lost about 120 people 2 years ago, so I have to start moving back up to that. But the guy next door has to do the same thing. The guys in the hotels need to do that. All over the country, people have got a "I need 20 people" sign going up on Trade Me, and there are very few people in the country.
Across the road, we meet a relieved Scott Pritchard, Chief Executive of commercial bay owner Precinct Properties.
Today's result is great from a tourism perspective, but we also need our workers to be back in the city. And, we've got the situation where all office workers have been sent home to catch COVID from their kids who have gone to school. And the reality is we've got a city that's full of hospitality and food and beverage retailers that need support.
Finally, some good news, but only after a number of tenants packed up and left, with more on the brink.
We've had, I would say, about a half a dozen of our retailers that haven't been able to make it through, which has been really disappointing for them. And then we're working with perhaps another half a dozen or a dozen that we're really trying to make sure that they do get a chance to trade. And this whole centre at Commercial Bay was designed around offshore tourists.
Then there's Ahi, the newish Commercial Bay kitchen that opened in a pandemic, navigating it ever since. Owner Chris Martin is Australian, his wife French. So today's news is personal. Finally, they can feed the family.
We were conceptualising the restaurant years before it opened, and then, the main people that we wanted to share that experience with were our family and were our friends, and they were the people that were, privy to everything, before it started. So they'll all be getting over here soon to see what it's all about, and that's hugely exciting for all of us. We can't wait.
Sweet, sweet certainty. Finally, back on the menu.
And check out the video version of that story from our two Nicks. We'll put it up on our webpage. Thousands of Australians are homeless in the wake of devastating floods in eastern Australia. The town of Lismore was one of the worst hit, and while the water may have receded, many homes are uninhabitable, with some uninsured. The major business centre is in ruins, and if that's not enough, a shortage of building products and tradespeople is compounding the problem. Local state MP Janelle Saffin says many homes have been wiped out by the floods.
I think today they have to demolish quite a few dozen. There were quite a few thousand listed as uninhabitable for now, but it doesn't mean they can't go back. They need to be fully checked and see that they're safe, etc., and that's happening. So it's quite a lot. This flood, and flood doesn't do justice to what's happened, we've never seen anything like it before. It's just quite shocking, devastating, stunning. But, we're staying as strong as we can.
So where are these people forced to stay, Janelle? Because if there are thousands of houses, there'll be thousands of people. So what conditions are they living in at the moment?
Some have gone to friends and relatives and, a variety of accommodation. We have evacuation centres around the region. People have gone to them. Our local people with our services, caring services, operate them. But, some of them can be in a huge room and people on their mattresses, and they've got their dogs and their cats and their ferrets and all sorts of animals, family pets with them.
I understand, Janelle, that there are lots of people who are uninsured. Why is that?
Mm-hmm. We live in a floodplain area, but even where your home, your house has never flooded, never thought it would flood, people were priced out of insurance. It was just too expensive for them to take it, and the fact that they'd never flooded before either. So there were two parts to it, and it would be over 70%, and that's with small business as well. And we needed to have the conversation 10 years ago, but we need it desperately now so that there is some sort of government-backed scheme. We have obviously I have at Christchurch and things that have happened since the Christchurch disaster, and, we expressed our concern and solidarity at that time, but looking at how we can do things better, looking at how we prepare better for these events, both short-term, long-term, and clearly we cannot have a situation where we have a whole bevy of people uninsured.
So how do you rebuild these towns then?
I've called for a reconstruction commission. I said we need one body tasked with one chain of command to pull everybody together to cover what I call the physical, the economic, the emotional, the environmental, all of that together in a reconstruction commission. And we need the Federal Treasurer to open his chequebook. We don't need handout, we need hands up.
I ask you this next question because I don't think necessarily people here appreciate just how fast and furious this was. But you had to swim for your life, right?
Yes. There were three things with me. As the state member, everybody was ringing me and I was trying to help when it was coming up fast. My husband was in our property, which had never flooded, in the house on the river. My neighbours, one tied a rope to trees, went over in a canoe, and she held him up under the chin and saved him. We lost our beloved dog, Zara, and at the same time I'd stayed in town to be on deck on duty with my friends in a house that had never flooded before. And we got told to sit on chairs on the table. I said, I don't think so. We're sitting ducks here. Let's get on the veranda. We're hanging off the rafters. It became clear. It was sink or swim, so we swam out.
That sounds utterly horrendous.
It was, but you imagine how worse or more horrendous it was for people in attics told to go up. Some of them couldn't get out, or they had hammers and had to bash through the roof. People on roofs with their kiddies. We did lose some of our well-loved local people, who drowned in their homes. But it was a lot of the locals who went out. Our state emergency services, local volunteers, all fabulous, wonderful, did what they could, totally under-resourced, under-prepared, and weren't able to rescue them. But, thank God for my wonderful community.
Janelle Saffin there. It is 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The resignation of Simon Bridges is forcing a by-election for the Tauranga seat. Mr Bridges yesterday announced his departure from politics, leaving the national stronghold seat up for grabs. But who will step into the ring is anyone's guess. Our reporter Leah Tebbett asked locals who's the best to represent them.
Whoever's the individual that is going to walk their talk, and that talk is what all of us want, that's who should be in office. And I wish I knew that person.
That's Amelia Hirota, owner of Banana Blossom Cafe. She, like many other Tauranga business owners, is sad to see Mr Bridges go. However, she is one of the few who would welcome Winston Peters back.
I think there is something that is very unique about him, and I think his heart is in the right place. You know, I think anybody who's a politician, you don't really know if you can trust them.
Mr Peters held the reins in Tauranga from 1984 to 2005, first as a national candidate, then with New Zealand First. Tauranga Chamber of Commerce Chief Executive Matt Cowley believes Mr Peters might have what it takes.
He resignates. That sort of maverick mentality kind of resonates there. In Tauranga, we rally in times of need, but we also don't like being told what to do. So someone like Winston Peters might actually do quite well here and turn it into a three-horse race and start splitting National's vote.
But the vote in confidence is not shared by all. Julie Hammond of Hammond Diamond Jeweller says the one person she does not want representing the city is Mr Peters.
Strong leadership is what we've had in the past with all the colourful characters, I think, that have represented Tauranga. In these times we need that strength of leadership, you know, even more.
What we don't want, I don't think, and I don't think it's just a personal fit, is Winston back. Been there, done that.
Miss Hammond says she does not believe Mr Bridges' retirement will change Tauranga as a National Party stronghold, although the most recent election saw Tauranga's Labour candidate, Jan Tinetti, reach new heights, shrinking the Nationals' margin from 11,000 votes in 2017 to 2,500. But Colonial Antiques owner Sandy Woodward can't see where the extra votes would come from to bring Labour forward.
Tauranga has always been a very national area. I think it definitely will be, a hard job. Honestly, I don't know. I suppose it could be somebody young who'll do the same kind of job and have the same community feel.
On the streets, most were happy to have the National Party representing them and Tauranga City.
There's a movement, there's a progressive feeling within the party to do well. I think they will. I think it's time. I think the public in general needs change.
Hopefully we can get someone as good as he is and that is interested in Tauranga. I think there's a lot of work to do here though.
Maybe. I think the new leader of National is going to make a big difference. I think it is a time for a change. It's good that he's moved on.
The process to select the party's new candidate will start in the coming weeks, while voters are yet to find out when they can return to polling booths.
The United Nations now says close to 3 million refugees have fled the fighting in Ukraine and about 1.8 million have crossed into Poland. Pressure on cities close to the border is intense, with beds running out in Krakow. An old shopping centre is now being used to house refugee families until they find longer-term accommodation. The BBC's Dan Johnson reports.
From desperation comes innovation. Abandoned 6 months ago, but now it's the latest safe space for Ukrainian families. Empty shops refitted in record time to take the pressure off a city struggling to cope.
There are 400 beds here, and there's capacity to add even more. We've seen transit camps for people fleeing wars time and time again, but it's the most modern of solutions to that age-old requirement, and it goes on and on.
But how long will this be for?
We are prepared to do this as long as it will be needed. So I cannot say it will be 1 week, 1 month. Nobody knows at the moment, unfortunately.
It's warm, it's dry, it's relatively comfortable.
Businesses have volunteered to put in these showers.
tiling.
We bumped into this British volunteer who's helped with the conversion.
It's going to help process and for those people who are displaced and help kind of alleviate the pressures on the borders down in Premish. So I think absolutely, I think it's great. I think it's what happens after this in the logistical chain of how these people then relocate to somewhere a bit more permanent.
The first Ukrainian families are settling in, enjoying some space, some peace and quiet after a journey that's left most of them stunned.
Normally I work as an emergency practitioner in Bridgewater.
This NHS doctor's here from Somerset. This is a big improvement on what he saw at the border.
They have showers, they have normal bathrooms, the rooms are actually separated. So far, to what I've noted, mostly it's anxiety, general pains. They've been walking or standing in a queue to cross the border for hours. So it was sad to see the children just with kind of like a empty face. It's something which I've never experienced before.
Like a place that looks like a chocolate centre.
Camilla's volunteering here as a first aider. She moved back to Poland 3 years ago after living in Manchester.
Are you able to help everybody?
We would love to, but sometimes it's just, we can't do it. Like, we try our best, and actually one ambulance broke on us, so we only have one ambulance now. So we do try to transport as many people as possible, so obviously, because every life counts for us.
And there's relief here in different forms for all ages. Those under the stress and strain of running from war, and for communities trying to look after them.
On the diplomatic front, there appears to be some glimmer of hope that peace talks between Ukraine and Russia may be successful. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky now says his country should recognise that it won't join the military alliance of NATO. The BBC's James Lansdale has more.
Officials from both sides continue to talk, looking for a negotiated settlement. The Kremlin said the discussions were positive, but neither side says where the progress is being made. From Ukraine's tireless president, though, a hint today of what might be part of any deal, a move away from joining the NATO military alliance.
Ukraine is not a member of NATO. We have heard for years that the doors were open, but we also heard that we could not join. It's a truth, and it must be recognised.
That may well be part of what Russia's foreign minister wants to hear. Today, as he met his Iranian counterpart, he set out some of Moscow's demands.
The
neutral military status of Ukraine, security guarantees for all participants, the demilitarization of Ukraine, so that no threats to the Russian Federation ever come from its territory.
But we're still a long way from any deal. Today, Boris Johnson gathered a group of Northern European leaders in London. The aim to bolster their defences in case the war spreads and keep up the pressure on Russia.
This is quite unbelievable what is happening now in our continent. And we need to make sure that we build the strongest, widest possible coalition to ensure that Vladimir Putin does not succeed, that we wean ourselves off Russian hydrocarbons.
Western leaders know that a negotiated settlement will become possible only if Vladimir Putin sees no alternative. And that's why they're determined to keep up the pressure on Moscow, militarily, economically, and diplomatically. That's why war-torn Kiev today played host to 3 prime ministers from Poland, Slovenia and the Czech Republic, the first heads of government to visit since the invasion, highlighting Russia's failure to seize the capital. And there were more economic sanctions for Russia too. The EU banning the export of luxury goods and steel imports, and Britain imposing asset freezes and travel bans on 370 Russians, including a defence minister, a former prime minister, and oligarchs and their families, along with many allies of Vladimir Putin. But all the pressure, all the diplomacy has yet to halt the Russian advance, and the devastation of Ukraine's cities continues.
Finally tonight, have you ever turned up at a holiday spot and wondered if you've arrived at the right place? Well, that's what happened in the United States, where a tourist has unwittingly become an intruder after mixing up his Airbnb address. Tourist Paul Drexler admits the situation could have ended badly after he woke up in a stranger's bed in Miami. TJ Parker explains.
This is the best possible outcome of breaking into someone's home and spending the night in their bed in Miami.
Paul Drexler made an honest mistake after spending the night in what he thought was his Airbnb, and turned out it wasn't.
I had accidentally got the address wrong. Going from the Airbnb app into the Google Maps and the Uber, the address became the house right next door.
Paul had just gotten into Miami to officiate a friend's wedding. After a long day of traveling, he got to what he thought was his unlocked room around 2 a.m., even following the instructions his Airbnb host left behind.
In the bedroom, the bed was made and ready to go, and there were 2 clean folded towels on the bed waiting for me.
Paul fell asleep and woke up the next morning to a very confused homeowner.
The next morning, I get woken up by like a knock on the door. I was surprised the guy knocked on his own door, and he goes, "Hey, can I help you? Like, this is my house." And I'm like sleeping. I'm like, no, this is an Airbnb that I rented. He goes, "No, this is my house." I could have been woken up by a very angry homeowner. Really bad things could have happened.
The homeowner showed him out, and Paul found his actual Airbnb next door.
In hindsight, now I look back and all the clues were there that this is not the right Airbnb. But at 2 o'clock in the morning, your brain's just like, this is it. This is the one.
He says now it's a funny story to tell after spending the night in a stranger's home in Miami.
I've stayed in hundreds of Airbnbs, and I've never had this happen before.
Eek, that is a super close call. Now, the last word on the tourism issue and opening the borders to visitors goes to Roger. Roger says, boy, I can't believe the comments re tourism. Why don't we just dig a hole and hop in it? That's about all we've got time for this evening. Now, the late news team, as always, will keep you updated throughout the night. If you missed anything from the program, you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō, and tomorrow from 5 a.m, frost and then a drought in Brazil, coupled with increased petrol prices and shipping costs. First Up looks at why you could soon be paying $7. Yep, $7 for a cup of coffee. Kia pai tōpō, have a great evening. We'll catch you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The government hopes more schools and preschools will be able to stay open when more than 1 million rapid antigen tests are made available. NATO defence ministers are meeting for the first time since Russia invaded Ukraine 3 weeks ago to discuss their response. Tourism operators are preparing for the border to open to Australians from April the 13th in time for their school holidays and the ski season. And the Abuse in Care Royal Commission